Hey dudes, this video was supposed to come out yesterday, but Time Vault comes into play tapped and I had to skip some time to use it. My bad. Time Vault is a wild card, and we have a lot to talk about. Let's start with the original wording of this card. Time Vault is a mono artifact in alpha, which just basically means that you have to tap it to use its effect. It costs 2 generic mana to play and has the following text. Tap to gain an additional turn after the current one. Time Vault doesn't untap normally during untap phase. To untap it, you must skip a turn. Time Vault begins tapped. So that is an interesting effect. And if you've been in the game for a long time, you probably have a good idea of what we're about to talk about. The keywords for today are ambiguity and errata, so buckle in. Before we get through the messy history of Time Vault, let's talk a little bit about intention and balance in game design. So, most of you know that Time Vault is an insanely busted card. Longtime players probably know that it wasn't always the case, but this card is very interesting because I learned that a lot of players have spent a lot of time thinking about Time Vault and arguing about it over the internet. I'm not sure I can confidently say what the intention of this card was. Did they intend for this to be a combo piece, or was it meant to be played fair and they didn't really give it much thought? I can't say for certain, but I would assume that they thought it would be used fairly and thus would be a potentially strong card, but not really a busted one. Still, intention and what happens aren't always aligned, and Time Vault was pretty busted from the start. People often look at untap effects and use Twiddle as an example. It is a fair shorthand, but Twiddle and Time Vault really isn't that strong. The real issue with Time Vault is combos, and at the beginning, the problem was a 3-card combo. If you used Animate Artifact on a Time Vault, you could attach an Instill Energy to Time Vault and untap it for free once a turn. So then you could tap it to get an extra turn, and then on that turn you could untap it for free with the Instill Energy, and then you could tap it to take an extra turn. And you see where this is going. Infinite turns in alpha. So Time Vault was pretty strong in the right circumstances, and is even one of the first 19 cards to hit the restricted list in January of 1994, with the formation of the Duelist Convocation International. It shared this honor with some impactful cards like Ali from Cairo and Dingus Ig, and I guess, like the Moxen. It was also the first card banned for power reasons, getting banned in March, which is also when they figured out that Channel and Demonic Tutor are pretty good. Time Vault would get unbanned in Vintage in 1996, but at this time it received errata. Keep in mind, Time Vault hadn't seen a printing since Unlimited, and to this day has not received another official printing. But they decided they didn't want people abusing it, so the new Oracle text for this card in 1996 was, does not untap as normal. If Time Vault is tapped and does not have a time counter, you may skip your turn to untap Time Vault and put a time counter on it. Tap. Remove the time counter from Time Vault to take an additional turn immediately before the next normal turn. If your intent is to prevent people from abusing this card while still allowing it to function in its intended method, this I guess isn't the worst way to do it. In fact, it was so effective that this card was pretty garbage in Vintage at the time. The idea here is that untap effects do nothing for Time Vault if it doesn't have a time counter on it. This worked pretty well for a while, since the steps you would need to take to break this are kind of a lot and also did not exist at the time. However, with this wording, if you somehow found a way to add additional time counters to Time Vault, then you could abuse it much like you could in the old ways. So, by 2004, the wording changed again to this. Time Vault comes into play tapped. Time Vault doesn't untap during your untap step. Skip your next turn, untap Time Vault, and put a time counter on it. Tap, remove all time counters from Time Vault, take an extra turn after this one. Play this ability if only there's a time counter on Time Vault. I tried to find a card that modified generic counters that existed before 2004, like, just said add an additional counter or something like that, and I couldn't find anything. So I assume this errata was made just in case, but maybe there was a way to break it. If you know of a card before 2004 that would do that, let me know. I couldn't find one. Anyway, everybody rejoiced because Time Vault was now fixed forever, and nothing could ever make a card that taps for an extra turn broken ever again. But what if I told you you didn't care about the extra turn? What if you just wanted to untap Time Vault? In 2005, Ravnica came out to the joy of many Magic the Gathering players, and with it, Flame Fulicide, a card that lets you tap your permanents to deal 1 damage to a player. Now, as someone not playing Legacy or Vintage at the time, the thought of this working in the rules is baffling to me, but I guess this combo worked. Anyway, with a Time Vault and a Flame Fulicide in play, you would skip your next turn to untap the Time Vault, then you would tap the Time Vault for its 1 damage to ping the opponent. Then you would skip the turn after that turn to deal another 1 damage. And after you had skipped your next 20 turns, the game is over because you dealt 20 damage to them. That's crazy that the rules were ever just kind of okay with this, even just by accident. Well, I say they were, but they weren't really. Once they figured out that this was possible, they changed this really quickly. Well, not so quickly that all the Legacy and Vintage players hadn't, gone out and bought a playset of unlimited Time Vaults. Unlucky. 2006 came around, and they changed it again, and the card then said, Time Vault comes into play tapped. Time Vault doesn't untap during your untap step. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may untap Time Vault. If you do, put a time counter on it and skip your next turn. Remove all time counters from Time Vault. Take an extra turn after this one. Play this ability only if there's a time counter on Time Vault. So by making it so that you could only skip your turn to untap this during your upkeep, it stopped this combo from working and left a lot of players very mad and a little broke. And earlier I mentioned that a lot of players thought a lot about Time Vault, and I was mostly alluding to this article here. Look at this. It just goes on, and on, and on. Now, the funny thing is, I actually agree with a lot that is said here, but they did not make it easy to agree with them. If you have some time, and probably at least a college reading level, you might find this an interesting read, and I've linked it along with the other sources I used in this video. But the actual text here isn't super relevant to this video. I mean, it is, but it isn't. His argument is long. And I'm mainly just bringing this up just to show how much people fucking cared about this. Anyway, the change that sparked that article was from March of 2006, and that article was from April of 2006, and the backlash that, caused nerds to write doctorates about Time Vault's errata, Forsythe then released an article where he explained the errata process and what the goals for it were, and when and why they would errata in the future. They also stated that they would not be doing any more power level errata, just cleaning up cards to fit with modern formatting. The funny thing is, they errataed Time Vault at the same time. In July of 2006, which is the same time that article by Forsythe was released, Time Vault's text now stated, Time Vault comes into play tapped. If Time Vault would become untapped, instead you choose untap Time Vault and you skip your next turn, or Time Vault remains tapped, and then tap, take an extra turn after this one. So they've gotten rid of the whole time counter stuff, and people were mad again, and then they changed the card again in 2008 to the following text. This artifact enters tapped. This artifact doesn't untap during your untap step. If you would begin your turn while this artifact is tapped, you may skip this turn instead. If you do, untap this artifact. Tap, take an extra turn after this one. And as you may have noticed, that text is remarkably similar to the text that the card started with, and it is still broken and restricted in Vintage and banned in Legacy, and that is the story of Time Vault. So with that out of the way, we can actually talk about Time Vault. Time Vault is a pretty interesting card. it's obviously broken strong. These days you would usually just use Voltaic Key, as those two cards in play give you infinite turns, and infinite turns is pretty likely to give you a win. It's pretty hard to fumble from that position. But what's really interesting to me is that Time Vault is kind of bad if you aren't doing a combo or some other abuse. Like, if you're playing this card fair and not comboing it, then it is pretty slow and arguably not really worth it. Depending on the card pool, of course. Like, if your games are ending on like turn 10, you probably have time to deploy and set up a Time Vault on turn 2 or 3, but in most formats, you're just giving up way too much ground for it to be effective, especially in formats that are where the game's over at like turn 4. It's definitely possible for this to be good, but I'll be honest, even when I'm like playing Time Vault with like War Mammoths and just turning mostly vanilla creatures sideways, it's surprising how often it kind of feels bad to put out a Time Vault. It's just really interesting to me how a card can both be so insanely broken and yet kind of just bad. I guess you could say that about a lot of combo pieces, but I guess I didn't expect being as disappointed by Time Vault as I ended up being when I was playing it fair. I think the craziest part about this card's whole saga is when you could skip multiple turns. Like, they had already made Chronotog by that point and baked in guardrails on that card. I'm not sure why they didn't just think to do something like that if they were concerned by it. I mean, obviously they weren't concerned by it because it happened in Tournament Magic and they were like, shocked Pikachu face. Overall, this is just such an interesting piece of Magic history, and I find it pretty hilarious that they kind of just gave up at the end and just said, fuck it. It reads remarkably similar to how it did in the beginning, which I just think is funny. Also, I am very interested to read any stories you guys might have about Time Vault, because there's so much turbulence and history with this card, yet it is pretty sparsely documented. I'll link my sources in the description if you want to go through and see for yourselves, but I struggled to find a lot of these erratas other than in like a Reddit post and some other things. But I think that's really all I have time or desire to say on Time Vault for today. I might have to come back and make another video going deeper into this topic later. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see what the comments say. Let's talk about the art. Time Vault was illustrated by Mark Teeden, and I really love this art. Mark is absolutely fantastic and has more iconic arts to his name than most, and Time Vault is another fantastic example. I like the color choices. I think this is fantastic. It's bright, it's cool, it's pretty, and that robe is so iconic. That weird creature in the back is pretty terrifying. I don't know much about it, but it definitely adds to the ambiance. This art is super cool, and I kind of like the implication that there's like this wizard factory smashing hourglasses to extract time magic. That's just kind of funny to me. I really like this art. It's super cool, but I'm a big fan of Mark Teeden, so it's not surprising. And wouldn't you believe it, I forgot to talk about the second art. Again, on another card. Time Vault never got another reprint beyond Unlimited, but it does appear in Magic Online, and it got a separate art in there in Vintage Masters. This version of Time Vault was illustrated by Young Hao Han, and this is very cool. I really like this. It kinda looks like what I imagine would be inside a Sylvan library, almost. It's very cool. I like it. Kind of an abstract approach to it, I guess. I don't know. I really like this one. It's very neat. Very cool. Technically very impressive. Okay, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the history lesson, and I'm excited to see your opinions in the comments. Otherwise, like always, you can like the video if you liked it. You can subscribe if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day. Thank you for watching.